Welcome to Khanversations. I'm Muqtedar, your host, and today I'm going to talk to you about a survey conducted by the Pew Research Center. If you remember, I did a conversation on their survey of American views about India. And so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to essentially comment on, provide actually a diplomatic briefing. I've not done one in a while now. So this is a diplomatic briefing on how much of the world sees China, or at least a segment of the world sees China. So this study, which was published just a couple of weeks ago by the Pew Research Center in Washington, D.C., which is probably one of the best in the world when it comes to public opinion polling, and it does both at home and abroad and covers a lot of issues. So they found that generally speaking, views of China are quite negative worldwide, and that is not surprising. And so we're going to take a look at really what several countries think about China. But I do want to make a point here that the survey is skewed in one way, in which that there is overrepresentation of countries from the West and extremely underrepresentation of countries from the global South. Do subscribe to Khanversations, ring the bell icon, like the video, do share it with your friends and your colleagues. So let's look at the views themselves. The views of China and its international behavior are apparently quite negative. So of all the people who were surveyed, only 28% people see China's international behavior as favorably, while 67% look at it in a very negative way, unfavorably. So 67, 70. So 5% did not make up their mind. And this is how it breaks up. When you look at China's role in the global sphere, percentage of people who say China interferes in the affairs of other countries are 57%, and only 35% say that China does not interfere in the affairs of the country. So for a country that constantly harps upon territorial sovereignty and independence of the countries, the fact that it is itself perceived as something, as a country that interferes in the affairs of other countries, must be quite painful. So China needs to look into this as to why countries really perceive that it is interfering in their internal affairs. I think partly it must be because China is investing in many countries and it has a political interest in what goes on in these countries. If you remember, a few months ago, the Chinese foreign minister went to Pakistan and he talked about domestic stability and domestic order because they have invested so much in Pakistan. They surely don't want to see their investments wasted because there is a domestic instability and crazy politics. Percentage of people who say China contributes to peace and stability around the world, just 23%. So clearly an overwhelming 71% of the people from these 24 countries feel that China is not a force for stability. Especially, look at Indonesia, it constantly probably feels threatened. Japan, South Korea, they're on the front lines. India, obviously, after Galwan and what happened in Arunachal Pradesh, clearly feels that China is definitely not contributing to either peace or stability in the South Asian region. So clearly, China is being seen as a belligerent power, and which is not a good thing for any power that wishes to establish hegemony and essentially become topple the United States as the most powerful, most influential, and most, I guess, sought after nation. Percentage of those who say China took into account the interests of countries like others, that is even less. Only 22% say that China cares about other people's interests, and 76% do not. Wow, 98% of the popular surveyed people answered this question. So while they may be people who may be silent about China's role in the global politics, but there is a lot of people who are angry about China's role with regards to their own country. So this is, I don't know how to say that. So, for example, if a similar survey was shown about India, then people in India would have said, well, that's a good thing because it shows that India is acting in its own national interest. And that is what countries are supposed to do. So I guess if the Chinese government would also see this survey, they would also say that, well, that shows that we act in our self-interest. But if you are seeking to be the global leader, then you cannot act just in your self-interest. You also have to act in the interest of your region, in the interest of your friends and allies, and also in the interest of the global order. And until China is seen as contributing to peace and stability in the world, and also taking into account the interest of other countries, until then, I don't think it will be seen as a global leader. So countries were asked about what they think about China in comparison to other advanced and rich countries on these particular issues, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 issues. So the first question was on technological advancement. So 19%, roughly 1 out of 5 said China is the best. I guess 20% of the world or 19% of the world thinks that China is technologically ahead of the United States and all European countries. Japan and also Germany, I guess. So that is interesting. And 51% say that China is above average. Well, that makes sense. So about 51 plus 19. 70% of the people do have a very positive view about China's technological advancements. I guess many of these countries are importing stuff from China, and so they are familiar with China's technological advancements. When it comes to military power, only 9% of the people who answered the question really felt that China was better than the rest. So I'm surprised that there are people out there who think that China is stronger or better than the United States when it comes to military power. I do want to remind people that when you think of China, you just think of China, maybe China, Russia. When you think of the United States, it's just not the US, it's also NATO and non-NATO allies of the United States, like Israel and India, for example. So the US is not just the US is a mega US. So think of that every time you think of power and conflict. When it comes to universities, that's even worse. Only 6% think that Chinese universities are the best, and only 1/4%. So at least as far as the military power is concerned, at least 53% think that China is a really powerful country, but only 31% of the people think that China's universities are above average. And of that, only, of the total sample, only 6% think that China. This is not a good perception. I don't know how you reconcile that. If Chinese universities are not very good, are not the best, then how can they have technological advancements? Isn't there a correlation between scholarship and research and technological development? Well, I guess people don't think very deeply when they take service. When it comes to entertainment, come on, I think Jackie Chan alone deserves 5 points. And okay, but so only 3% think China's entertainment is the best, and 14% think it's above average. I don't expect the best to be very high, but I do expect above average rating to include a lot more people than I'm seeing here. And so the standard of living, I don't know how people perceive standard of living. Unless you have lived there, I don't know how. Anyway, so only 3% think China has the best standard of living. I agree. It's just not possible for a country whose GDP per capita is not really very high. It's, I think, somewhere in the mid-teens. So clearly it's not, the standard of living is not very high. So let's look at this map that Pew has provided. It's a very interesting map, and you can see from this the unfavorable views of China are quite widespread. And so if you look at, Asia, for example, Asia, the country which has the most favorable view of China is Indonesia. So 75% Indonesians have positive views of favorable views of China, and 25% have negative views. But everybody else, India, Japan, South Korea, and Australia, all have very negative views. In fact, 75% of the Quad, the Indo-Pacific Quad, is right here, India, Japan, and Australia. And they all have very negative views. But if you look at Asia, India's favorability rating or unfavorable is equal to the global average. If you remember, 67% of the people in the world thought of China unfavorably, and the same is true with India. But what is to me quite surprising is that there are still about 33% people in India who do have a favorable view of China. So it's roughly 1:2. So out of 3 Indians, 2 have a negative view of China and 1 has a positive view of China. Quite interesting. I think that's interesting. That should send a signal to China saying that there's still hope for them to make amends with India and they have not lost India entirely. But then when you look at the global north, if you look at Europe, for example, France, Germany, Greece, everywhere you see negative, except Hungary, and to some extent, the southern European countries like Greece, Hungary, and Italy, they are just above the 50%, and Hungary is at 50%, like Israel, 50-50. Half the country has negative views and half the country has positive views. But if you look at South America, very positive views. I was in Argentina last year, lecturing there on US foreign policy, and Brazilians were joking. So, Dr. Khan, you're in Argentina. So, I mean, they feel that Argentina is very firmly in the camp of China. If you look at the Italian ratings of 58%, so it is one of the countries which has the most favorable ratings from Europe of China, other than Greece and Hungary. In this survey, the rest of the countries are pretty high in the 70s, not as bad as South Korea, Japan, Australia, and India, but quite high in the 70s. But Italy, which is the only member of the Belt and Road Initiative and is trying to get out of it right now, I don't know why they seem to have it's half and half. So 8% this way or that way, 4 or 5% this way, that way, and they are there. So that's interesting that with only 58% unfavorability rating in Italy, they are trying to pull out of Belt and Road Initiative. I think that it's probably peer pressure from other European and NATO and European Union allies. Mexico is surprisingly very, very positive, 67%. It is the opposite of India, where in India, 1 out of 3 has positive views of China. In Mexico, 2 out of 3 have positive views of Mexico. So this is the global, so-called global survey. And as you can see, the survey is skewed and biased by overrepresentation of NATO and Western allies, 10 countries from Europe. This looks like the football World Cup with overrepresentation of Europeans. So it is an interesting view. I think this view would be slightly different if you had more representation from the global south. I also want to make an interesting point, at least I found interesting, that India, for the last 2 years, at least since it became apparent that India would be the president of G20 as well as the SCO summit and hosting them both in India, that India started projecting itself as a leader of the global south and also as the voice of the global south. But if you notice, India seems to be completely out of sync when it comes to China with the rest of the global south countries. All the countries in the global south, except India, have very positive views of China. 75% in Indonesia, 77% in Kenya, 85% in Nigeria, 52% in Brazil, which is part of BRICS with China, and 66 in Argentina, and 67 in Mexico. Well, throughout the global south, you can see that China enjoys favorable rating, except in India. So it must be interesting when India has conversations with the rest of the global south. It said, I'm going to represent you at international forums like G20 and the UN Security Council. And then what happens when it's time to vote on China? Will India vote in accordance with the views of the global south, or will India vote in accordance with its own national interest? And that is where this question that is asked of China becomes relevant to India. Percentage of people who say China takes into account the interests of the countries like theirs. So will India take into account the interests and views of the other global south countries when it opines in international forums on China? So I hope you found this interesting. I found this survey quite interesting myself. So thank you for listening. And if you have enjoyed it, or even if you have not enjoyed it, do subscribe to Khanversations, ring the bell icon, like the video, do share it with your friends and your colleagues. Until next time, thank you for watching.